First up, you will need 2 kilograms of fresh beef. Don't use frozen or previously frozen beef. This could really impact the shelf life. You can use cheaper cuts of beef like silverside or rump. In fact, I recommend using the cheaper cuts. Make sure you remove any sinew, gristle, or silver skin because this will make grinding the meat much easier. Then cut the meat into small chunks so that they can fit inside your meat grinder. You will need 860 grams of beef fat. This gives you a 30% fat to 70% meat ratio. The butcher will normally provide this quite cheap. This lot here cost me about £1.50. If you prefer to make this a little leaner, you can use 700 grams of beef fat, which will give you an overall 75% meat to 25% fat. But the fat really brings a lot of flavor. Don't use pork fat for this. It can be done, but it does require curing. Cut the fat into similar sized chunks as the beef, because again, this needs to go inside your meat grinder. Layer the meat and fat out in a single layer. Use a second tray if you need to, like you see me using here. Place this in the freezer. You want everything to be really cold when grinding your meat. This is massively important to ensure you get the right texture, and it actually makes grinding a little bit easier as well. After an hour, you want to put your meat grinder bits and pieces in the freezer too. And after a further 30 minutes, once the meat has firmed up a bit, but not actually frozen, you can remove it and the meat grinder bits. Be careful with the metal bits, they can stick to your skin. When you put the meat grinder together, make sure the flat part of the blade faces outwards. I've made this mistake before and it's not great for your machine. You want a coarse grind, so use a grinder plate with bigger holes. The one I use here is an 8mm, but 10mm would work well too. Put the ground meat into the fridge while we do the next steps. Dry roast the coriander seeds for about 3 to 5 minutes until they become fragrant. They smell incredible. Give them a good grind, but not too fine. You don't want powder. You want little chunks of the coriander in there as well. I mean, some of it's going to be powder, and that's just fine. You want to then add in the peppercorns and salt, especially if the salt is coarse salt, and you want to grind that down as well. After the initial grind, pour this out into a bowl and check for anything that needs more grinding and place that back into the mortar. And at this stage, you can add the cloves, especially if the cloves are whole cloves. And nutmeg, I'm using powdered nutmeg here, which is just fine. And then grind everything down well. Remove the seeds from the dried chilies. It's okay if a few make it into the mix, but you don't want too many in there. Of course, you can add more chilies if you want to really amp up the heat, but this amount strikes a great balance. Roughly chop the dried chilies. You want to be able to still see little flakes of red in the end product. Then mix together the wet ingredients. Now, I'm using my own spicy peach chutney that I made in a previous video, and I'll leave a link for that down below so you can make your own. Otherwise, you can use Mrs. Ball's chutney. This is a traditional South African chutney, which tastes amazing. And you will need to add in a few extra chilies because obviously that one is not too spicy. I think they do a spicy one. Sprinkle the dry mix over the ground meat and gently mix it all together. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you must ensure you don't mash up the meat. You want to keep the texture like you see here, nice and loose. Add the wet ingredients and give it another gentle mix. Place the sausage mix back in the fridge while we prepare the sausage casings and the sausage filler. Throughout this process, make sure that all your equipment has been properly cleaned, sterilized, and sanitized before using. Grease up the filler funnel with residue from the meat on your gloves or use some water to help the casing not tear when you're applying it. You want to use natural sheep sausage casings. The ones that I'm using here, they're 24mm, but anything from 22mm to 26mm will do the job. You also don't need to tie a knot at the end of the casing like you normally would with other sausages. When filling the sausage, a looser fill is preferred. You don't have to ram it in there like you would with other sausages. So it actually makes it a little bit easier, to be honest. And if you are using a filler like I'm using, a second person turning the crank would make life much easier than trying to do it all yourself. To dry the sausage, I'm using my biltong box. I've previously shown how this is built and we'll link that video down in the description. It should take around 3 days for your Droewors to dry depending on your setup, and you'll know when it's ready when it takes on a darker, near black color. and is firmer to the touch. You can also keep an eye on the humidity levels. I wait until my biltong box reads around 30 to 35% humidity. The smells in here are incredible. I wish you could smell it. Actually, the smells in here for the last 3 days has been incredible while it's been drying. But it smells absolutely perfect. It looks good as well. And we can take off a bit of a link here. It's snapping nicely, so the casing has dried perfectly, and this feels dry to me. I like my Droewors quite a bit drier than some people. Some people like the meat a little bit red still, a little bit soft. I like it as dry as I can get it. And the good thing is, obviously, the drier it is, you actually get a little bit longer shelf life too. But that looks amazing. So we're going to break that apart. That sounds perfect. And obviously, give it a try. That's the real test here. See how we did. Wow. Absolutely perfect. If you never had Droewors before, it's obviously quite meaty. Got a little bit of fattiness in there that really gives it some amazing flavor. And of course, with the addition of the chutney and the chilies, it adds another dimension to it. So I've been kind of working on this recipe for a while now. There's a company that I buy Chilli Chutney Droëwors from, and I absolutely love it. And I really wanted to replicate it. And I think this recipe here is close as damn it to what they do. I don't think I'll need to be spending those huge prices for Droewors again. That tastes amazing. Really, give this a go. If you've never made sausages before, this is probably one of the easiest sausages to make. Just make sure you follow the instructions, the right amount of salt and the right amount of all the other ingredients, because they all add to preservation of this and, of course, the flavor. But that tastes perfect. One thing I will say, you can play around with the fat percentages if you want. I went quite high here with 30% fat, but I think you could get away with about 20%, 25%. It really depends on what your preferences are, but the fat really adds a good flavor to this. Let me know in the comments down below if you do give this a try. And yeah, I'm sorry if you do, because you're going to get addicted to this amazing snack. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you on the next video, and until then, stay spicy. Oh, yeah.